Now, colleagues, the purpose of today is for us, the Democratic Alliance, to give feedback as to what our vision to grow jobs, to grow the economy and create jobs is. Ahead of the medium term, we are strictly going to give a focus as to what it is we truly mean as the Democratic Alliance when we say we want to rescue South Africa. And so the main address today will be given by Federal Leader John Steenhuisen, and thereafter there will be interactions with the media. So I'll now hand over to John.
Thank you very much, Karabo, and good morning to members of the media that are present here today, and also to those who are joining us online. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today. Today I'm going to give you some insight into what the DA is fighting for inside the government as the medium-term development plan is prepared. I'm going to give you a look behind the scenes on the priorities that the DA is fighting for in the medium-term development plan that are necessary for us to achieve our goal of growth and jobs. The 11th of October marks the full 100 days since members of the DA were sworn in as ministers and deputy ministers in the Government of National Unity. 30 years into our democracy, South Africa is in a state of deep crisis. And in the wake of the last election, our country desperately needed a government able to chart a path forward. And it was with this in mind that the DA made the decision, as a political party, to enter the GNU. There was no ways we could have justified turning our backs on South Africa and South Africans in its and their hour of need, when the opportunity to make a positive contribution was presented to us. During the last election, we told South Africans that help was on the way. And already DA ministers and deputy ministers have been hard at work in their respective portfolios, and the contributions made to date have been significant. Sentiment is improving, the rand is up, the fuel price is down, interest rates are dropping, and indicators all point to a real opportunity for growth and jobs in South Africa. For many years, between 80 to 85% of people consistently said that South Africa was moving in the wrong direction. But that changed literally overnight when the DA entered national government. In our latest polling, the percentage of people who think South Africa is headed in the wrong direction fell to the lowest level I've ever seen, to only 45%. In turn, the share of people who now believe the country is headed in the right direction, which was stuck at 15 to 20% for many, many years, has shot up to 37%. The recently released Social Research Foundation polling confirms this, and even The Economist magazine, in today's article, says that there is a lacquer vibe in South Africa. Today, however, the focus is on what the DA cabinet members are planning in their departments as we head towards the medium-term development plan and the medium-term budget policy statement. After 100 days in office, the DA has identified 5 key priorities which we believe are important for the GNU's medium-term plan, which will be announced in October. Every single one of the DA's priorities is focused on the core issues of growing the economy and creating jobs. There are, of course, many other policy reforms that the DA is pursuing in the GNU. But the 5 identified today are amongst what we believe to be the most critical for growth and jobs to be created. There are also 4 things that we have identified that we will not support in the GNU under any circumstances. So let's start with the priorities. The 5 top priorities are a clear commitment to reducing the debt to GDP ratio to under 70% by the end of the 7th administration. That includes a comprehensive spending review in which every program of government is assessed for impact, and those programs that fail to achieve measurable positive outcomes are cut. This is essential in order to fund priority commitments such as infrastructure, education, health, and security. Secondly, driving significant investment, growth, and job creation by including the following items in Phase 2 of Operation Vulindlela, the creation of a competitive energy generation market, significant investment into energy transmission infrastructure, the immediate concessioning of ports in Cape Town and Richards Bay, with a particular focus on the Port of Cape Town, which is a major hub for the export of South Africa's agricultural products, and the opening of more terminals in Durban's port. Opening access to freight rail and concessioning the management of the rail network to competent managers and private partners, and creating a secondary market for broadband. Third priority is the digitization of home affairs and reforming South Africa's immigration system to attract remote workers, skilled workers, and most importantly, more tourists to South Africa. The fourth priority is dramatically expanding access to cheap, reliable broadband to the poorest of South Africans in the poorest of places, and making smartphones cheaper so that people can take advantage of the increase in available bandwidth. The fifth priority is refocusing Infrastructure South Africa to become a single point of entry for government-led infrastructure projects in order to scale up private sector investment that contributes to growth and jobs. In addition to these critical priorities, there are also 4 specific things the DA will not agree to under any circumstances. Firstly, further bailouts for state-owned enterprises. South Africa has spent over 350 billion rand in bailouts for SOEs over the past 10 years. And this is one of the reasons why we are in such a very difficult fiscal crisis. Money that should be available and readily available for teachers and nurses is now gone. It has to stop somewhere, and we intend that it stops now. The implementation of Clause 4 and 5 of Bella, which opens the door to depriving children of mother tongue education in single medium schools. Thirdly, the implementation of the National Health Insurance Scheme in its current form, which will bankrupt South Africa without improving health care or health outcomes and without advancing us a single step closer to achieving the goal of universal access to basic health care for all South Africans, regardless of their income status. And fourthly, the attempt by the EFF to win support for a private members bill, which seeks to change the ownership structure of the Reserve Bank, which would decimate confidence in the future of our economy. We will use our votes in Parliament to block any changes to the ownership structure of the Reserve Bank. After 100 days, the GNU is on the cusp of making its most important strategic choices. And the DA is determined to play a role in ensuring that every choice that is made will drive growth up and unemployment down, and bring hope for a better life to many more South Africans. This is the reason why we entered the GNU 100 days ago, and it remains our purpose today. I'm incredibly proud of the team of DA ministers and deputy ministers who have got to work in rescuing South Africa and building a better future. Together with our political party, we are determined to build our country. I want to take this opportunity as well to thank all of the South African citizens at home who have heeded our call for the builders in South Africa to unite. I still maintain that by standing together as people who wish to build a better future, to build our country, and to build an economy that is inclusive and growing and jobs rich, by standing together in that goal, nothing and nobody will be able to stand in our way of rescuing the country we love, igniting economic growth, and creating many, many new jobs for many, many more South Africans. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John. So colleagues, there we have it. The only way we can do it is if we grow and create jobs. That is the focus of the Democratic Alliance in the GNU. What I am going to do now is to open for a round of questions. As is standard protocol, I'm going to request that you state your name, the news agency you represent, and to whom you are directing your question briefly with the question. So I'm going to take the first round. I'll start on this side, and then I'll move along. Let me take the first 3 questions on this side. I'll start with you, ma'am.
About growth and creation of jobs. As the DA, you're not interested in inclusive growth? Because I'm not hearing anything that does not relate to a trickle-down approach that you have in terms of growth. Is there anything specific that you're going to do to try and transform the economy for the poorer people in this country?
Okay, thank you. The next one.
Tabiso Gova from Eyewitness News. Mr. Steenhuisen, you've listed some of the, I think, non-negotiables that the DA is not willing to vote on, and say you're going to use your votes in Parliament to vote against these. I just want to know, in terms of the GNU, there is obviously an understanding that you signed on to, that if there is a consensus that is reached within the GNU partners, then it will be adopted. So let's just say, for example, that the NHI or the better clauses, that there is sufficient consensus that is reached in the GNU that they should be implemented. Will the DA continue to actually vote against these, even though obviously consensus has been reached in the GNU? Thank you.
Thank you.
Junior Kumalo from Newsroom Africa. Just to build on the question that was asked by my colleague Utaviso, you indicated that there are 4 things that are non-negotiable that you're not going to support as the DA. Should the Bela bill, should the president then, after 3 months, implement those 2 clauses, what is the DA going to do about that? And also, while we are on the Bela bill, Minister of Basic Education, Siviwe, it's going to be a month in about 2 days since the president halted the implementation of those those 2 sections of that bill. How have the negotiations or engagements with the president gone so far? And just to ask something that is not related to this, to the leader of the DA, the NPA has indicated that they are not going to prosecute anyone in the matter of Phala. I just wanted to get your thoughts, Mr. Steenhuisen, around that. I know the DA has indicated that it will not support the EFF when it comes to trying to reintroduce that impeachment process in Parliament. But what are your thoughts about the recent developments on Phala? Thank you.
Right. Let's curb it there for now. So I'm first going to hand over to John, and then Sibiwa for a response.
Thank you very much. On inclusive growth, of course growth has to be inclusive, and that's why I said at the end of the comments, a inclusive growing economy that creates jobs. The greatest inequality in South Africa is not necessarily between rich and poor. The greatest inequality is between people who have a job and people who don't have a job. And a job is the surest way out of poverty and the most effective ladder towards being able to build a better future for yourself and your family. So when you create jobs, particularly for the 42% of South Africans who do not have a job, of course it is inclusive. All of these issues that we are driving, from home affairs and the digitization thereof and the efficiency thereof and getting rid of backlogs, are designed not for rich South Africans, although they will benefit, but many of them have found ways around the long queues at home affairs by using banks and the like to be able to access their documents. It is the poorest of the poor, and the mother has to take 2 days of work to go and get a birth certificate for her children. It's the father who's got to take days of work to stand in a queue just to get a reissue of an identity document so that he can apply for a job. Those are the people who suffer the most of the inefficiency. Who will benefit the most out of having access to things like Starlink and greater broadband access? The rich already in South Africa have access to internet. It will be those rural areas and poorer South Africans who will finally have access to cheap, good, efficient Wi-Fi and internet access that could be a game changer in terms of being able to turn things around. So everything we do in the focus on growth and jobs is centered around inclusive growth and inclusive job creation. That's entirely the whole point about why we're in government. If we weren't able to create jobs and growth, then of course we would not be in government. On the second issue, around consensus, we were very clear about Bella right from the very beginning in the negotiations going into the GNU on the statement of intent. The reality is, and as I set out at my recent speech at the Press Club, which I provide as recommended reading for anybody who wants to understand this particular issue, that, of course, in a government, the ANC needs to understand that they can't get everything that they want, and so too the DA understands it can't get everything that we want. But it can't be a situation where the DA's views and opinions are just not taken into consideration and are not accepted. We would certainly not, if there was cabinet consensus on, for instance, getting rid of the independence of the Reserve Bank, just simply sit in a government that does it, because we believe it will crash the economy and will affect growth and jobs. We would not sit in an environment where clauses of the Constitution would be violated just because other people sit around a table and agree on that. That doesn't mean we have to agree on it. And so any coalition, whether it's a small one or a large one like the one we currently have at a national level, is absolutely predicated on finding consensus and a way forward. And I believe that there are ways for us to find consensus in these particular issues. But there are issues which we were very clear about going into the negotiations for that particular issue that we said would be non-negotiables for us, as did the ANC. And we've had to respect those, and we've had to make compromises on those. But it can't be the smaller parties that have to make all the compromises, and the large party in the coalition doesn't have to make any compromises. So there will be compromises on all sides. We're willing to make compromises in a number of key areas. We already have done so by going into the GNU. And I think that the sooner we move to a model where there's an acceptance that you don't get everything you want and that you've got to give up on some things in order to make it work, I think that will be better and healthier for us in South Africa. On the NPA, as a party that respects the rule of law and processes, we obviously have noted the comments of the decision of the Deputy Public Prosecutor, and our discussions with the party is that the NPA will be summoned by our members on the Justice Portfolio Committee in Parliament to come and explain their decision. I think that there does need to be greater explanation of the decision. I think that when a decision like this is made and it has obvious implications that reach right the way to the very top of government, that there does need to be greater information that is provided. And I believe that the Justice Portfolio Committee in Parliament should be the place where the NPA come and share with those who are exercised with conducting oversight of them, are able to understand the decisions there. Once that information is given, it will obviously determine how you proceed going forward. Thanks. Sylvia, you want to deal with Bella?
Just to build on what John has said, particularly around the Bella and within the GNU, the Bella Act, one of the things that I think has been important from this process is the establishment of the technical committee that seeks to be a clearinghouse within the Government of National Unity. And I'm made aware by my colleague, Minister McPherson, that one of the inaugural meeting of that technical committee will be taking place in the next week, and this is one of the issues that will be dealt with. The reason why this is important, the reason why a technical committee in a complex in a complex government of national unity, a type of a coalition government like this is important, is because what we want to do is we want to be able to resolve issues that were red lines during the negotiations, issues that we do not agree with, so that we can reach the kind of consensus we want at that level. The reality is that we are bringing together 10 different political parties who come from 10 different ideological backgrounds. This was never going to simply be easy unless we were one organization. No one party won an election, and therefore, one of the things that is going to be the hallmark of this government of national unity is the ability to resolve conflict. And not all conflict is bad. Ultimately, we have to be able to be mature enough to have these difficult conversations so that we can arrive at a point where we're placing the interests of South Africans first. But I think it would be amiss of us to think that somehow we are not going to be able to have this disagreements. We will have disagreements. We have been in disagreement with the ANC about many things over the years. It's not going to simply change or go away within the last 100 days. But ultimately, our guiding principle, being in this government, is ultimately putting the interests of South Africans first, growing the economy, and making sure that we create jobs. Regarding the progress made on the consultation process, you will recall that the President has taken lead on the consultation of clauses 4 and 5, and so he is leading the process there from the presidency, and so we'll look forward to hearing when that will begin, and how and what the mechanisms of that consultation will look like. Of course, as colleagues will remember, one of the things that the DA had said around this matter was that it was important that it goes back to Parliament, where there is a structure, where Parliament is the appropriate structure to deliberate on these things and look at these specific clauses. The President has elected to use this particular mechanism, and so we're going to have to allow him and give him the space to then see how he's going to do the consultation and what the outcome of those consultations are. With regards to the remaining parts of the Act, we as a department have started looking at commencement of the other sections because, of course, remember, the Bella Act, as much as these clauses are the most topical, but there are many other positive aspects of the Act that we need to start implementing, things like criminalizing corporal punishment. And some of these things are quite important for our education system and have become a subject of many case law judgments over the years. So that's where the process is. Thank you very much, Karabo.
Thank you, Sif. Colleagues, I'll open for the next round. I'm still on this side. I see there's one hand, 1, 2. Okay, and then I'll move over to the other side. I'll take 4, as was the case. So I'll start with you there at the back, and then I'll move over to the other side.
Hello, my name is Lisa Gatandwa for Times Live. I've got a couple of questions for John, or Minister Steenhuisen, rather. You talk of 4 items which you would not support, and one of them being the nationalization of the Reserve Bank, which is something that the ANC had resolved on in its 2017 elective conference. I'm wondering, John, if there has been discussions around that item, and if there are any red line items which would threaten your inclusion or participation in the GNU. John, it's been weeks now, months now, where the GNU has been talking about shaping dispute resolution mechanism. Given the many disagreements that you've had as political parties, when are we actually going to see this dispute mechanism? In terms of foreign policy, you recently, with some other ministers or DA ministers in the GNU, went to China. We know the DA's stance around China and Taiwan. Has the DA had any changes when it comes to that? And given that there will be a BRICS summit coming up, what does it mean for the DA? Do you intend on attending or going to Russia, meeting Mr. Putin? What does it say about the DA and its foreign policy? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sidi Madia, Eyewitness News. Liz has touched on the question around Russia. I also had a similar question. My questions are also for Mr. Steenhuisen. When the GNU was being negotiated, from my understanding, the DA did want to see it funding expression at provincial level and local government level. From my understanding, Gauteng feels that your national leadership is enjoying the benefits of being in a GNU, yet it's not stepping up to protect or defend them as well as it should. Just your comments and thoughts around what's happening in Gauteng and what's happening at local government level and what the way forward is, because the one thing that's been made very clear by the ANC in Gauteng, it will not be dictated to by what's happening at national level in terms of what the DA wants. So I just want your thoughts on that. Sorry, just give me 2 seconds. Yeah. Sorry, there's something else. And then there was a conversation around the policy Lekgotla as well from the GNU partners. Where did that go? And then lastly, again for John, part of the ticket that you rose on in the lead up to the elections was being anti-cadre deployment. I'm looking for your hits and misses being in government, because as it stands today, you are now being accused of cadre deployment, with the EFF having laid a complaint against you with the ethics committee. Managing and navigating that and your understanding of what that is. Thank you.
Thank you, Tidi. I'll move over to this side. I see those are the only two. Okay. How many hands do we have this side? I've noted two, so there's 3. Okay, I'll club you all as the last hands, because there are no other hands. You will be the last person to ask the question. Okay, let's move over to you.
Good afternoon. Raymond from Mdntv. Just want to know, on the billable, you said it's a red line.
Raymond, who are you?
No,
who are you directing the question to, Bella or John?
To Minister Stanley.
Okay. Just if you were your constituents are Bella's. Yes, Netva.
You said Bella is a red line. If Bella is implemented in its current form, does it then mean that the DA will step away from the GNU? And then also you said something that the ANC said there are items that they won't it's non-negotiable for them, and you had to compromise. What are those items? Thank you.
Good morning, my name is Yamtanda Kappa from News 24. I'm going to start with the Minister for Basic Education. Siviwe, do you regret staying away from the Bella Bill signing? I know you've said that it was ceremonious, and also how are things between you and your boss now? And also the 2 clauses that have been suspended or halted. They speak to language, they speak to admission. Is the DA protecting white interest by asking that these be put on hold? And then, Mr. Steenhuisen, I'm going to add to Tidi's question. Will you cooperate with the Ethics Committee? Will you appear once summoned? And I'm going to stop there for now. Thank you.
Thank you. The last question.
Thank you very much. My name is Cliff. I'm from Chakaranda FM News. I've got 3 questions. The first one is on the idea of reducing debt. Maybe just explain what kind of interventions will you make to reduce debt. And then the second one, you said you will be opposed to further bailouts. And first thing that comes to my mind is like ESCOM, you know. So what do you suggest a crippling SOE like ESCOM should do? Should it continue to increase tariff hikes? And the last one is Basic Education Minister. Following this food poisoning incidents, what's your response to that? Is this something that has to do with small businesses in the spaza shops, or something that has to do with feeding scheme at the schools? Thank you.
Thank you, John. I'll hand over to you, and then Sibiwe, you can come up after him.
I think that Sibiwe already outlined that the process for the technical committee, which has been led from the DA's side by Minister McPherson, is taking shape. The presidency had a meeting with all of the leaders of the party 3 weeks ago in Cape Town, where we agreed to establish the mechanism to be a clearinghouse for controversial potential issues that may arise. And Minister McPherson and the Minister and the Presidency have been working to make sure that that team is set up. Minister McPherson will represent the DA on that particular technical committee, and obviously all of the parties are submitting the names that they would be for that. And I think it is an important mechanism. One of the key lessons that we learned when we went to Germany last year on coalition management is continuous dialogue and trying to resolve as many matters behind closed doors rather than having the discussions out in public. And I think, particularly in a 10-party coalition, this is going to be incredibly important because you've essentially got 10 potential different voices around this. And Bella is not something the DA alone is taking on. There are at least 3 other parties to the GNU that are equally opposed to Bella in its current form and in those particular clauses. So I do think it's going to be a very good for the health and longevity of the government of national unity for us to be able to continue in using this resolution mechanism to raise those issues that are perhaps uncomfortable. In terms of foreign policy, there is going to have to be a look at foreign policy as a government, and there's already been some discussion at a cabinet level, and there's an agreement that documents will be coming to cabinet for us to have discussions around our approach to foreign policy. But let me be very clear. I mean, the DA at its last Congress, as late as its last Congress, said that we were committed to BRICS, and the BRICS is there, and we need to use it for our advantage. But what we do need to determine is what is South Africa's national interest, and how is that national interest best advanced around the world. And we must use all mechanisms available to us to be able to advance South Africa's interests, to create new markets for our goods. And I think we need to move away from being ideological and look at rather being pragmatic about what is in the best interest of South Africa, South Africa's producers, South Africa's industries, and South Africa's markets. And I think India provides a very good example of a foreign policy that looks at every situation and says what is in our best interest, not just slavishly following a south-south line or a north-south line, but looking at what is in our country's best interest. The reality is China is a very important trading partner for South Africa. They have a massive market, and the more South African goods that we get having access to that particular market, the more we are able to grow local industry and create jobs here, demand-driven growth for South African products, particularly on the agricultural side, but also on the manufacturing side, is a way towards us getting more people into work in South Africa. If we can grow the demand for South African products, particularly in big markets, we can do so. We, as a political party, have certain views on Taiwan, but the position of government is very clear. There's a one China policy in government, and it focuses on expanding trade and making sure that we are able to leverage strategic partners in the international environment. And so I will continue to go to China. In fact, I'll go anywhere in the world to sell South Africa's agricultural and agro-processed goods, as I'm sure other ministers will go to seek financing, to go and seek an ability to be able to expand our own horizons and advance South Africa's interests in the world and domestically. I haven't been invited to the BRICS summit in Russia. I will obviously look at the invitation when it comes, but I have a duty as a government minister to put the interests of the people of South Africa, who I've taken an oath of office to serve to the best of my ability, and where that takes me in the world and where it takes our ministers in the world to go and market South Africa and to try and expand markets for South Africa, we will do so. CD, okay. Let me be very clear, because there seems to be a misperception that's floating out around there, that there was some agreement that the GNU would trickle down to provinces and to local government. It was very clear in the negotiating phase of the statement of intent that this applied to a government of national unity at a national level, and that there would be different configurations in different provinces, and local government was not on the table. If we put local government on the table, it would have meant that we would probably never have finished the negotiating process in the time that was required, because, as you can now see, there are some very complex dynamics that exist at a local government level. So there was never a commitment, and there's no notice in the statement of intent that says we must now cascade the government of national unity down to governments of provincial unity and governments of local unity. It was never a clause or condition therein. There was, however, discussions around how we could seek to stabilize local government, given the fact that there is a very real concern that if you're able to shift the needle at a national level and start to move things in the right direction, if you do not have an implementing ability at a local government level, particularly in the big cities, that it would really be an obstacle to further economic growth and job creation. And so we entered into discussions with the ANC long after the GNU was formed around how we could look at stability agreements in the key metros, and a number of them were on the table for discussion. Johannesburg, Ekurhuleni, eThekwini, KwaDukuza, and several others in the Northwest Province, where we're looking to stabilize. Given the ANC's behavior in Tshwane, which we believe is a travesty and is going to set Tshwane back, removing a mayor who was actually getting the city moving in the right direction, and by all accounts, the Auditor General's reports, Ratings Africa, was slowly starting to get Tshwane back to health, removing him for no other reason than political posturing and the vanity of the vanquished in the election, that you remove him. It's a setback. As a result of that, our chairperson of the Federal Executive has written to her counterpart in the ANC saying that until the situation in Gauteng's metros, but particularly Tshwane, is resolved, we will not be entertaining any further negotiations at a local government level around any agreements until that is rectified. And that is the clear position of the Federal Executive of the party, and that decision has been sent through there. In terms of policy Lekgotla, the policy Lekgotla is still in the pipeline. Obviously, what government and the presidency, no doubt, are engaging upon is who the stakeholders are who need to be invited, and who needs to be there, and the format that it needs to take. It's up to the presidency to decide when and where that will take place, but we have made it very clear that when that starts to move towards a situation of taking place, that we would like to have consultations on that, as have all of the other parties to the GNU. Let me then deal with cadre deployment. And again, I'm now compelled for, I think, the 15th time to indicate to people what cadre deployment is and what cadre deployment is not. Cadre deployment is putting people into the permanent civil service where they will have line function authority over departments and entities and state-owned enterprises for no other reason, based not on their qualification or ability to do the job, but on loyalty to a party. That is cadre deployment. It is internationally defined. Staff in a minister's office are not members of the public service. They hold no line responsibility or command in the department. They work to support the minister. The DA has been very clear from the beginning, when we took on the cadre deployment issue, that we don't regard staff in political offices as cadre deployment. Indeed, mayors, speakers, MECs, premiers of where the DA has occupied positions have put people in their political offices where they feel they are best able to provide support for the political executive office bearer. When the political office bearer leaves office, those people leave with the political office bearer. Their employment comes to an end. They do not remain as permanent members of the civil service. So I think that important distinction must be made clear, because putting people into a ministerial office is not cadre deployment. That is appointment of people to serve you. And the DA has never raised issues with anybody who's been deployed into a political office bearer's office, because we know that their only line of responsibility is to the political office bearer, and in fact they have no line authority within the department. So the minister's staff in the Department of Agriculture and the Ministry of Agriculture have no line authority over DGs, DDGs, chairpersons, senior managers within that department. They have no line authority whatsoever over them. Their authority begins and ends in the minister's office. So we must be clear when we throw terms like cadre deployment around, that we understand what cadre deployment is and what cadre deployment is not. Now, I feel very sorry for the EFF. I feel very sorry for them. And in fact, I'm going to make a very broad and generous offer today, because they really are a terrible opposition. And as a former chief whip in Parliament, I'm going to sit down with some of them and explain to them how Parliament works. First of all, if you feel a minister has not been honest in a parliamentary reply, the Ethics Committee is not where you lodge your complaint. And I would encourage him to go and read the Executive Ethics Act, which shows that such a complaint should go to the Public Protector's Office as a custodian of that. The Ethics Committee has got no mandate to determine the veracity or otherwise of members of the executive answers to Parliament. So I'm very happy to help and school the EFF in that particular regard. But some of them are frankly beyond help. And I think have been victims of a failed education system that has left large people unable to read for meaning. Because if they had taken the time to read properly the answers to the parliamentary questions that they themselves submitted in Parliament, they would have seen nobody has been appointed or been paid a salary in any minister's office that does not meet the requirements. It was there in black and white, the answers to their questions. Nobody is being paid, no one's been appointed, nobody has been taken on that does not meet the requirements. So they really do need to learn to perhaps read the answers to their own questions. But I don't blame them, because frankly they need any distraction they can find. Plunging to 6% in the polls, loss of support in the last election, exodus of senior leadership out of the organization, hurtling towards the Congress, which will no doubt be the coronation of the leader for life of the EFF. I would also want to find every effort I could to distract attention away from it. And I can tell you something, that if I had produced an election result like Mr. Malema produced, I've no doubt that many of you's first question to me today would have been, why are you still there? And I hope that Mr. Malema is going to answer those questions. Raymond, thank you very much. Bella is a red line for us, and we've made it very, very clear. Whether the DA exits or not, that is a decision of the federal executive of the party, and obviously we would like to exhaust all efforts to find a compromise position on that. But if it's not possible for us to be able to find each other on that, then as the FedEx has made this very clear from the beginning, this is a big issue for us, and we would urge the parties to this to really focus on finding a consensus-driven way forward on this particular matter. Otherwise, I think it does present an existential risk to the future of the GNU. Whether I will account to the Ethics Committee, I'm a Minister of State. I'm accountable to Parliament. I've appeared before the Portfolio Committee. I've appeared before the National House of Traditional Leaders. I've appeared before the House to do questions. If I'm called by any committee in Parliament, they don't need to summon me. They just need to write to my office and say, we'd like to see you on a certain day. I will avail myself, because I believe fundamentally in parliamentary oversight, and I will cooperate with any structure of Parliament in terms of that. And I look greatly forward, in whatever way, shape or form, to putting the EFF's own questions as evidence in there of the answers that they have received, which show very clearly that this is nothing other than political posturing and smoke screening to cover up their own failings. Jacaranda, how reducing debt? Well, there's a number of mechanisms to do so. Ashwin Sarupan, who is the Deputy Minister of Finance, has been working incredibly hard. He has a number of documents on this. It's obviously very technical interventions. But if we don't reduce debt, debt servicing costs are going to continue to crowd out the social spend in South Africa. For every cent we spend having to pay debt off, it's a cent that can't go towards hiring a teacher, making sure we have nurses and police officers on the streets, making sure that we can build infrastructure so that we can use infrastructure growth to grow the economy. So we have to reduce debt. The debt burden, if it continues to spiral out of control, will present this biggest single existential crisis to South Africa. The reality is, if one looks at the fiscal space, and if one looks, and I'm sure it will become very clear when the Minister of Finance delivers the medium-term budget policy statement later this month, that indeed South Africa is in a very, very tight space fiscally. There's no doubt that, and it's not a secret, that revenue has fallen far short of expectations in this particular financial year, and so some tough choices have to be made. And I think when you have to make a choice between whether you bail out a state-owned entity, whether it's Eskom, whether it's South African Airways, whether it's any one of these others, and the choice comes down to whether you bail it out for the umpteenth time, or whether you use money to make sure that we have teachers teaching our children, nurses healing our, doctors healing our sick, and police officers keeping us straight, I think we've got to default to making sure that we focus on the service delivery side of it. Money that goes into bailing out state-owned entities often, as we've seen over the last 10 years, ends up as dead and wasted capital that, had it been used in a different way, could perhaps have transformed our health system, transformed our education system, transformed the way in which we keep people safe in South Africa. So I fundamentally think that the time has come for us to get realistic about what we can and cannot afford. And like any household budget that faces constraints, choices have to be made. And often those choices are tough. But it's time government starts to make those choices, because the alternative is us heading towards a fiscal crash, an economy that then loses confidence of markets and the world, and that then leads to a spiral of collapse around the country. Thank you very much.
How's my relationship with President Cyril Ramaphosa? It's excellently professional. And I just want to deal with the issue around the language and admission policy in schools. I think it's important to understand that when people talk about mother tongue education, they're not talking about mother tongue education wanting to talk about Afrikaans without actually talking about Afrikaans. I think if, first of all, in majority of South Africans in primary school from grade 1 to grade 3 are taught in their mother tongue education. And in fact, the science says to us that if children are able to learn in a bilingual way beyond grade 3, we are likely to see an increase in literacy levels, which is a big obsession of mine, that we are not performing as well as we should when it comes to our literacy levels. And so we must do everything we can to actually make sure that our children are able to read and read for meaning in any language or in some language. So I think it's lazy, and I think it's shallow to make the conversation solely about protecting one sector of society than thinking about the education sector as a whole. And the reason why this is important is because, colleagues, there are massive problems facing our education system. Massive problems. In fact, about a week or two ago, I outlined the budget deficits that we are facing. Now, this is a crisis of massive proportions, because we are looking at provinces that are likely going to go bankrupt within a year or two if things continue the way that they are continuing. So my obsession in office has been, one, to analyze where we are in terms of our budget deficits and where Treasury can assist provinces so that they can deliver a quality education system at a frontline service. My obsession has been protecting the role and the posts of teachers so that we can make sure that learners have teachers in classrooms, that we can manage ratios in classrooms, so that we can make sure that we are not excluding millions of South Africans from being able to access quality education and actually being able to access the economy. And the reason why this is important and a big obsession of mine is because if we don't get this right and we don't get this portfolio right, we risk locking out of the economy, perpetuating inequality further, particularly for millions of poor black learners. So my obsession is greater than just one particular legislation. There are 13.5 million learners who look to us to get the system right. There are 500,000 educators who look to us to protect their jobs, and that's my obsession. And so that is part of the things that I have to deal with. But one of the things that I've really been obsessing about is how do we get learners in South Africa to read for meaning, to be able to stay in school so that we can get foundation phase right, so that we can see greater results at the end of matric. So that is really my driving force and has been the thing that has underscored all my efforts over the past 100 days and what will continue to really propel me in the next coming 1,000 days. On the issue, Buti, you raised the issue around food poisoning. So I've received a briefing from the provinces around the food poisoning. Number two is that these incidents seem to have been isolated. My concern was that this food poisoning might have come from the National School Nutrition Program, but I've been assured that the one incident that happened in Gauteng happened from a matric camp that took place, and the other incident that happened in Limpopo happened and on a separate occasion. It's unclear and has been unclear whether or not these learners bought food from a particular shop and where this was obtained. And so the provinces are busy with that. But I want to say, and I want to really express my deepest condolences to the families that have lost learners. One learner is a learner too many in our system, and it breaks my heart to have to even look at the faces of parents and tell them that their loved ones are gone when they have had such a bright future. So it's an absolute tragedy. And this is why, again, my obsession with looking after the National School Nutrition Program is something that I'm unwavering on. It's a 10 billion rand contract that ensures that 9.7 million learners in our schooling system get a warm meal every day. Sometimes that's the only meal that they will have that day. So that is why I seek to protect that line item in our budget at all costs, even in the face of budget cuts, because we want to make sure that, one, the food is of quality, number two, that learners never suffer food poisoning on the hands of government, number three, that money is not stolen that's meant to be going to this kind of program. So it is separate incidents. I have engaged with the provinces, and as I said, it's an absolute tragedy that we've lost learners, and I'm wishing the learners that are in hospital, particularly those matrics that are in hospital, because of course they're getting ready for their matric exams in a couple of days. Thank you.
Thank you, Siviwe. So I've closed the floor rounds. There are two questions that have popped up online. I'll just address those two questions, give them to the people who will be responding, and then we'll be done after that. The first question goes to Minister Public Works and Infrastructure, Minister McPherson. How will Public Works contribute towards the priorities outlined by John? And perhaps when you're there, also expand on how we're going to be reducing debt. The second question goes to Minister Malazi. What can we expect from your department in the medium term? Expand on how John spoke about the broadband. How are you working with broadband? Those are the two questions online, colleagues. I'll first start with you, Dean.
Thanks, Karabo. I'll also just, John has asked me to touch on the technical committee, which the party has tasked me to lead for them. So just firstly, I think from Public Works and Infrastructure, our key focus over the last 3 months has been ascertaining what our contribution can be to growth in this country and job creation. We are the single largest landlord owner in the country, with 88,000 buildings and 5 million hectares of land. Those assets are not being used for economic growth. They are not being used for public good. And so our task is to start to look at what are the most valuable of our assets, how can we start to package those, to leverage capital to be put into our infrastructure projects. We also have to understand that the state cannot continue to carry as many properties as it does. It is unsustainable, and it is unrealistic, and it is a burden to people in suburbs or townships or wherever they may be, where these properties are attracting crime, are being invaded or are being hijacked. And that's why we sought to create technical teams with Tshwane, with eThekwini, and Cape Town to start to look at how can we either transfer land or properties to those cities that they may wish to use for social housing or for safe spaces or whatever they may choose. And also, how can we create lines of responsibilities to be able to protect properties in those municipalities. And those are really starting to take shape, and we are doing some good work there. We have also become very focused on reclaiming what we have lost. So properties that have been invaded, properties that are being illegally occupied. We have already, in the last month, very quickly, in 3 months, we were able to get orders, eviction orders on 2 properties that we were able to then take back, and they have until the 17th to leave those properties. On the infrastructure side, infrastructure in South Africa is incredibly disorganized and fragmented. This thing's trying to hurt me. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this now. It's fallen off. Okay, I'll just leave it like that, yeah. Yeah, then I'll be accused of breaking it. We must make sure that we have a consolidated and focused infrastructure plan in this country. Everyone is just left up to do whatever they want and how they want it. We have 950 billion rand within the medium-term expenditure framework that is allocated to infrastructure, and I'm sure that South Africa would agree that those results linked to that value is incredibly indifferent. Infrastructure in municipalities has by and large collapsed and ceased to be built. Those are not my views, or they are my views, but they are actually supported by findings of the Auditor General. So what we have said is that we want to use an entity called Infrastructure South Africa that has people who are a lot cleverer than I am to plan, prepare, and package infrastructure programs for municipalities, for various other entities, because they are able to crowd in private sector investment. And so theoretically, if we were able to get 200 billion rand out of the MTF infrastructure plan, we could leverage R1 trillion worth of infrastructure build in the country over the next 5 years. That makes sense. And so we have begun those discussions. We have put a policy paper together that is called the 8 Pillars of Infrastructure Reform, and it is going to require an all-of-government approach to work. But if we get it right, and the financing that we have been able to have discussions around in London last week and China 3 weeks ago is incredibly promising. The Asian Infrastructure Bank that we are a member of for the last 8 years, we have never received a single dollar out of them. They will be coming to South Africa next month for the first time in 8 years to conduct their country review of South Africa with the intention to start funding infrastructure projects. That hasn't happened in 8 years. That is potentially very important to us. And so we've been working hard on those connections with funders, with bankers, and with other institutions. On the technical committee, if I can just touch on that, I think that it comes at the right time because it's allowed ministers in cabinet to get to know one another, understand what our bona fides are, that we really are committed to this thing. And the success of the technical committee is not going to be done in the bright lights of press conferences, but it's going to be done in the personal relationships that we have been able to build up over the last 3 months. And so a colleague of mine and counterparts of mine, Minister Marapin Ramakgopa, we have over the last while been working on some thoughts and ideas of how this technical committee can work, which will be chaired by the Deputy President. And one of the first orders of business has to be Bella and the NHI. And those are going to be tough discussions. And South Africa should not be scared of the noise that is created around disagreement. We are not a kumbaya government. We are a government that has to contest ideas, We're a government that has to fight for policy that advances this country. But we also need to be given the space in the technical committee to be able to deal with some of these very complex issues where we have mandates from our parties and find out how we find solutions. And I'm confident that when we come into that committee, I think it meets on Wednesday for the first time next week, we need to outline what our work program is. We need to outline what the terms of reference is and exactly what the rules of engagement are. So each party feels that they are able to bring their issues to the table, that there are no predetermined outcomes in that committee, but that there is a genuine sense of willingness to negotiate, to compromise, and to put the country first. Thank you.
Good afternoon, colleagues. Thanks very much. With regards to broadband, so our focus is on making sure that we can get those South Africans that are not connected or do not have access to the internet to have that access. We currently have approximately 15 million South Africans who do not have access to the internet. And you can imagine that the majority of those, if not all, are based in rural communities from villages that some and many of you in the room come from. So one of the areas that we are advocating for is looking at the policy environment that would then provide the certainty that the telecommunications companies need in order to enhance their investment in broadband infrastructure to be able to reach the remote areas. But we know that historically, because some of those areas have not been commercially viable because the traffic in terms of internet usage is very limited, we have to think now about how do we open up the space to increase freedom of choice for the potential internet user, but also to be fair to the market. So we are looking at a policy directive that can open up the space for low orbit satellites to enter the market. And it doesn't matter where those low orbit satellites come from, whether it's the UAE, it's Europe or Rwanda, but we want to ultimately get to a stage where the South African potential internet user has the freedom to choose whether they're going to be relying on fiber, on broadband, or that use is going to be through satellites in the form of low orbit satellites. Secondly, it's around the issue of cutting the cost to communicate. For many of us, the usage of smart devices is not just a luxury anymore. It's a basic tool to communicate that we're using. So one of the things that we're advocating for, and we've been in these preliminary discussions with Treasury, is to relook at the classification of smart devices. This will include your smartphones, your tablets as luxury devices because they carry an additional tax, which then makes them more expensive to purchase for people that do not have a job. That is unthinkable to even think about owning a smart device. But if we've got the stated ambition that the country has of getting to 100% internet connectivity by 2030, we have to look at removing all these barriers to entry, and removing or reducing the cost of smart devices is one element of that, so that we can encourage this whole idea of having a digitized society with the digital literacy skills that we need to be able to compete in the world and to catch up with the advances that other nations have made in technology. So those are our two primary focus, and I'm quite confident that we'll be able, throughout the duration of our term, to be able to get a breakthrough on them, because the primary thing is we have to make it affordable for poor communities to have access to the internet, because that then makes it easier either for learning purposes, for entrepreneurship purposes, or even for leisure purposes, to be able to leverage the power of technology and the internet. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ndade Malazi. Colleagues, now that's it. I want to take this opportunity to thank each and every one of you guys that is watching online that couldn't be here with us physically. I want to say thank you. And for those of you who are still here now, there will be an opportunity for you guys to have one-on-one engagements with those of our GNU ministers and deputy ministers present here. So don't leave just yet. You can still get through to some of the questions you want. There are refreshments at the back, and I want to say thank you. Shap shap.
The Government of National Unity has been in office now for just over 100 days.
Democratic Alliance leader John Steenhuisen says his party now has a meaningful role to play in the reconstruction of